welcome to McRoberts Live Bite Sized, where we cover the key issues of the day in a short question and answer format. Today's bite sized episode is the first in our COVID-19 series, which we'll be bringing to you in the coming weeks whilst the UK gets to grips with the current coronavirus outbreak. We'll be aiming to bring you timely insights on the key points you should be aware of and action you can take in relation to issues affecting you and your business as a result of COVID-19. I'm Megan Jenkins, a solicitor in our employment law team, and I'm joined today by Deborah Miller, who's a partner in the team. Please note that this content was accurate on 7th April 2020 when this episode was recorded. This is a high-level commentary of the latest legal position. It's for guidance only and is not legal advice. In this episode today, I'm going to ask Deborah some questions about the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, also known as furlough leave, which will operate and how this will operate in practice. Last week, the government released further much needed guidance about how this new scheme will operate in practice. The guidance for both employers and employees can be accessed on the gov.uk website. So, to start off, Deborah, which employers are eligible to access the scheme?
Thanks, Megan. Well, first of all, I just want to make a note that the legislation implementing the new scheme hasn't yet been implemented, and that's expected imminently. And that's quite important because that will give further details and clarification of the scheme. What we have at the moment is the guidance only, and that's not legally binding. So the guidance can and has been changed by the government. So it's therefore important to check the most up-to-date position. My comments today are going to be based on the guidance as at 7th of April 2020. So to answer your question, any UK organisation with employees can apply for the scheme, and there are 3 criteria that they need to comply with, and they're relatively straightforward. First one is that they've created and started a PAYE payroll scheme on or before 28 February 2020. The second is that they're enrolled for ePAYE online, and the government have said that this can take up to 10 days. So if employers haven't done that already, that's something that they can be getting on with. And the third one is that they have a UK bank account. Now, the government has made it very clear that their expectation is that the scheme will not be used by many public sector organisations. Now, this is on the basis that the majority of these employees are providing essential services. In addition, where employers, which includes non-public sector employers, are continuing to receive public funding for staff costs, they're expected to use that money to continue paying staff rather than claim under the scheme.
So it sounds like most private sector employers will be covered by this, which is quite useful to know. So just my next question is, which employees can employers claim for?
There are 3 conditions to be eligible for the scheme here. The first one is that employees must be on the PAYE payroll on 28 February 2020. Employees on unpaid leave cannot be furloughed unless they were placed on unpaid leave after 28 February. However, what the latest guidance makes clear is that employees who have left their employment since 28 February can be included, provided they're re-employed by the employer. The previous guidance which we had stated that only those who had been made redundant could be re-employed, but the latest guidance makes it clear that any employee who's left since 28 February can be re-employed. There is a note of caution here, however. We would really strongly advise employers to take advice before re-employing such employees. This is because there are some less obvious consequences of doing so which need to be considered. So, for example, it's not clear whether these employees will retain their continuity of service, so they might have more than 2 years service and able to claim things such as unfair dismissal. What about annual leave? Will they continue to accrue annual leave? And more importantly, what happens in terms of the termination of their employment at the end of the scheme? So these are all things that need to be considered. But otherwise, the definition of which employees are included in the scheme is wide, and it includes employees on agency contracts, flexible or 0 hours contracts. Importantly, the scheme does not apply to those who are self-employed, but a separate similar scheme has been introduced for them. So that's the first of the criteria. The second criteria is that the employee must not be undertaking any work for the employer. This means that employees who are working but on reduced hours are not eligible. Employees are able to undertake training, do volunteer work, whilst they're on furlough leave, provided that they do not provide services to or make any money for their employer. And the final criteria is also a really important one that's sometimes missed by employers. And the final criteria is that employees must be on furlough leave for 3 weeks or more to be eligible for funding.
And how does this apply to employees who are off on sick leave?
Employees on sick leave or self-isolating should get statutory sick pay but can be furloughed after that period. Employees who are shielding in line with public health guidance can be placed on furlough leave. The guidance also helpfully states that employees who are unable to work because they have caring responsibilities resulting from the coronavirus can be furloughed. So this would include, for example, employees that need to take time off to look after children.
And how does this apply for eligible employees who have more than one job?
It's a good question, Megan. Well, the guidance on this is actually very clear. If an employee has more than one employer, they can be furloughed for each job. Each job is treated as a separate job, and a cap of 80% wages or 2,500 applies to each employer individually. Interestingly, the latest guidance also states that employees can begin work for a new employer while on furlough leave. However, the terms of their existing contract of employment may prevent this and should be checked. It's not unusual for contracts of employment to prohibit working for another employer whilst you're employed by the existing or original employer.
That's really interesting. It sounds like the scheme will be quite flexible once the legislation's announced. So my next question is, can employees insist on being placed on furlough leave?
No, employees cannot unilaterally choose to be on furlough leave. The agreement of their employer will be needed.
And can employees and employers come in and out of the scheme?
Yes, employees can come in and out of the scheme, provided that any period of furlough leave will last at least 3 weeks. So to give a couple of examples, firstly, an employer could rotate furlough leave amongst employees, provided each employee is off for a period of at least 3 weeks. Another example might be that employers could place employees on furlough leave, say from 20th of March for 3 weeks, then after that require the employees to return to work for urgent work in April for, let's say, 2 weeks, and then back on furlough leave for 3 weeks after that. This always assumes that the work is in categories that remain possible.
So perhaps just to complicate the matter further, what's the position in relation to annual leave during furlough leave?
So it's likely that the 5.6 weeks leave under the working time regulations continue to accrue during furlough leave. Also, the government has passed emergency legislation relaxing the restriction on carryover of the 4 weeks leave which derives from the Working Time Directive, and that's with effect from the 26th of March 2020. The regulations permit the carryover of up to 4 weeks leave, but it was not reasonably practicable to take it in the leave year as a result of the effects of the coronavirus.
So does this mean that annual leave can be taken during furlough leave?
Well, that's a really interesting question and one that we don't have a clear answer to at the moment. It's likely that workers can take annual leave during furlough. However, employers are likely to be concerned with the effect of taking annual leave on their ability to obtain reimbursement from HMRC. The interaction between annual leave and furlough leave is not currently clear, and there are several potential issues with allowing or requiring workers to take annual leave during furlough. For example, annual leave might not be treated as furlough leave, so the pay may not be recoverable from HMRC under the scheme. Or secondly, furlough leave needs to be taken in blocks of 3 weeks, so arguably cannot be interrupted by annual leave.
Great, thank you for that, Deborah. So now that we know the background to the scheme, what process will employers need to follow?
So there's a 4-stage process that the employer will need to follow. The first step in that stage is deciding which employees it is proposed to place on furlough leave. So if not all of the workforce is being placed on furlough leave, care has to be taken and a fair process followed to determine which employees will remain at work and which will be on furlough leave. For example, it will be important to ensure that any decisions are not discriminatory. The guidance makes it abundantly clear that equality and discrimination laws apply in the usual way in this context. One solution might be that an employer could initially ask for volunteers for furlough leave. However, the problem might be that this results in more volunteers than the employer wants to furlough. So the second stage, the next step, is designating employees as furlough workers. Now, in the vast majority of cases, the employer will not be able to unilaterally impose a change of worker status to furlough worker. In most cases, employee consent will be required for this. This means that most employers will be required to agree the change with employees and agree the designation. The guidance states that if sufficient numbers of staff are involved, it may be necessary to engage collective consultation processes to procure agreement to changes to terms of employment, and we can advise on the process to follow for organisations if that applies. In the current unusual circumstances, it's anticipated that many employers will agree to this change. However, employers do also need to consider what steps they will take in the event that agreement is not reached. Negotiation and agreement might not be needed where the employment contract gives the employer the unilateral right to withdraw work. However, this is not likely to be the case for most employers. The third step is employee notification. There will then be a formal process of notifying the employees in writing of their designation as a furlough worker. Ideally, the employer should advise how long it expects furlough leave to last and set out the pay arrangements which will apply. We recommend that employers put employees on furlough leave for an initial period but make that subject to review. This formal written notification needs to be kept for a minimum period of 5 years. The final step is an HMRC submission, and this is submitting to HMRC details about the furloughed workers and their earnings. So the following information is going to be needed: the employer's ePAYE reference number, the number of employees being furloughed, the claim periods, the start and end date, the amount claimed, and that's in relation to the length of furlough leave of 3 weeks, the employer's bank account number and sort code, the employer's contact name, and the employer's phone number. Now, the plan is that this information will be submitted through an online portal, but that online portal hasn't yet been set up.
So once the portal has been set up, what payments will employees receive under the scheme?
So we have some more details of that in the guidance. HMRC will reimburse the employer for 80% of furlough workers' wage costs up to a cap of £2,500 per month, and that's plus the associated employer national insurance contributions and minimum auto-enrolment pension contributions on that wage. The guidance on the inclusion of fees, commissions and bonuses has changed since the scheme was first introduced. So I'm just going to read to you what the guidance currently states about that. The guidance says you can claim for any regular payments you're obliged to pay to your employees. This includes wages, past overtime, fees and compulsory commission payments. However, discretionary bonus, including tips, and commission payments and non-cash payments should be excluded. Now, unfortunately, the specifics of what payments will and will not be included and how these variable payments will be calculated is not yet clear. For example, it's not entirely clear what is meant by compulsory commission payments. It's also not clear how past overtime is going to be treated, and we really need to see the final version of the legislation or get further guidance on this. However, what is clear is that salary should not include the cost of non-monetary benefits provided to employees, including taxable benefits in kind. Similarly, benefits provided through salary sacrifice schemes, which could include pension contributions that reduce an employee's taxable pay, should not be included in the reference salary. Advice should be sought if the employer pays pension contributions in addition to the minimum auto-enrolment pension contributions, as such further pension payments may still require to be paid by the employer, and changing those arrangements may need consultation. Finally, the system for reimbursement is still being set up. However, it's understood that the payment will come to the employer by means of a grant, who will then pass it on to the relevant employees.
Great. So the 80% of wages or the cap of £2,500 per month per employee, how will this be calculated?
So again, the new guidance has now provided some details of how the 80% wage costs will be calculated, and we're expecting some further guidance on this in due course. For employees with fixed salaries, the 80% calculation is based on the employee's gross salary as at 28 February 2020. For employees whose pay varies, the employer can claim the higher of either the same month's earnings from the previous year, or the average monthly earnings from the 2019 to 2020 tax year.
And do employers have to pay the remaining 20% of salary?
There's no automatic right for employees to be paid the remaining 20% of salary not covered by the scheme. However, this might be a topic which forms part of the negotiations with the employees when agreeing their change of status.
And is the cap of £2,500 the net amount the employee receives, or will it be subject to tax and national insurance contributions?
Again, the guidance is clear here, Megan. The sum paid to the employee during furlough leave is subject to income tax and national insurance in the same way.
And what would the position be if 80% of an employee's pay is less than the national minimum wage based on their normal working hours?
So the guidance states that employees on furlough leave do not need to be paid the national minimum wage with reference to their normal working hours. And that makes sense because they're not working. However, if they undertake any online or other training, then they must be paid the national minimum wage in respect of those training hours.
And how long will the scheme be set to last for?
So the scheme is backdated to the 1st of March 2020 and is open for at least 3 months from then. The government has said that it will be extended if necessary. In terms of the setup of the scheme, HMRC are urgently working to set up the new scheme of reimbursement, and the government expects the scheme to be up and running by the end of April 2020.
And my final question is, will employment rights continue to accrue during furlough leave?
So employees will remain employed during furlough leave and will retain their length of service, yeah.
Well, those are all the questions I have for now. Thank you, Deborah, for the very helpful and informative update, and I hope everyone listening also found this update to be useful. For more information, if you have any questions or feedback, or if our employment law team can be of any assistance, please email us at employmentlive@mcroberts.com. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to bringing you our next episode.